Excellent. Well, it looks like we are at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, perfect. We just want to say thank you all for joining. We're so excited to have you in today to learn about formula queries. And let's go ahead and just kick it off. So again, hello everybody, and welcome to our Empower session on formula queries, redefining what is possible with Quickbase. From my first introduction to Quickbase about 5 years ago to looking at the platform now, I am honestly amazed at the awesome changes and growth that our product has gone through. Our product team takes great care in choosing updates and feature additions, and truly the changes that are made are because of you all, our customers. So I'm incredibly excited to present a new feature for you today, that is formula queries, truly redefining what is possible with Quickbase. Before we get started, I want to throw a couple of scenarios at you to kind of get you thinking. Do you have a database in which you frequently find duplicate entries, or you know that there's duplicates, but you're not really sure how to identify them? Are you a project or resource manager that struggles to actively know which resources are available? Have you ever needed rolling summaries or sales transactions month to month? And if you've dealt with, projects and holidays and trying to take that time off, have you ever had to create like a complex relationship structure to account for those holidays during the duration of a project? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, or you're at least curious about any of these challenges, you're definitely in the right place. So let's go ahead and jump into formula queries. Ryan, do you want to kick us off with an introduction?
Absolutely. Thank you, Ashley. My name is Ryan Flutter. I'm a solution architect here at Quickbase. I've been at Quickbase for coming up on 2 years. Prior to that, though, I was a customer for about 7 years across a few different organizations. And really, this session, formula queries, and what we're going to be showing off today is, as we said, truly redefining what is possible with Quickbase. And I wish that this had been around years before, when I had to do a lot of those more complex solutions.
Awesome. And great. My name is Ashley Banning. I'm a solutions consultant with Quickbase. I've been here right at about the 3-year mark. I'm down here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so love, being in Texas and the flexibility to work from home. But I was also a previous Quickbase customer, so in the manufacturing space, and was tasked to do some Quickbase things, and honestly just fell in love with the product. So fast forward, a few years. Also super, super excited to be presenting formula queries today. So in terms of an agenda and what we're going to cover today, number one is we're going to cover what are formula queries. So we'll talk a little bit about how they're different from traditional formulas, how they're different from relationships, when you should use relationships versus formula queries, and also a little bit about the query language and just how you use them. We'll actually run through a couple of examples and demonstrations as well. So the things that we mentioned in the intro, so around resource planning and holiday tracking and things along those lines. Then we're actually going to have you break out into sessions to where you guys can discuss, exactly what challenges you feel like these formula queries will be able to solve. And then we're going to come back and, bubble some of your ideas up on the screen. So that'll be kind of fun to see all the different ideas that come up, and we'll leave some time for Q&A.
Excellent. And to kick things off, we've got a Menti with a couple of questions. So go ahead and either scan this QR code with your phone if you have it handy, or you could open up your browser and enter the code here on the left. So once everybody gets that, we'll jump over and actually display the Menti. Awesome. Hopefully everybody is good. We're going to jump into the Menti. And if you still need the code, it is up here at the top of the page. If you go to menti.com, enter that code, and you'll be able to answer in. Excellent. So looks like a lot of people are super excited about this. Some people are, maybe they heard that it could simplify their apps, but don't maybe fully understand what is possible. Then we've got a handful of people that maybe have no idea, and they're just excited to learn more. So this is awesome.
I definitely would put myself in the first category. I've been waiting. So excited.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
Awesome. So it looks like people are still kind of getting their answers in there, but we're actually going to go ahead and jump into the next question here. So just kind of want to gauge what your level of expertise is, how long you've been a builder, that type of thing, and where you would classify yourself. That way we kind of know the audience we're talking to and have a little bit more data to go back and visit it afterwards. Okay, awesome. A lot of people in that intermediate and advanced. And just a couple of beginners. This is great.
And that's totally fine. No matter what your level is, there's something for everybody here. And so don't feel like if you're a beginner, like, hey, there's nothing for me here. You know, at minimum, you should leave with just ideas and possibilities of the things that you can do with Quickbase now.
Yep, absolutely. Awesome. So really good feedback there. Appreciate everybody's input. And let's jump back over to the slides. And we're going to go ahead and kick this off.
Awesome. So a few of the key takeaways that we want you all to leave with. So basic understanding of formula queries, kind of again, just understanding how they're a little bit different than traditional formulas, you know, some of the uses and things like that. We also want you to understand some of the differences between formula queries and relationships. This is still a learning process for us. So we, you know, not everything is perfect, but we're coming up with some ideas, and, you know, this should generate some ideas from you all as well. And then lastly, we'll show you a couple of use cases of what these solve for. And then also, hopefully you'll come up with some of your own as well. So you'll leave here with some understanding of some of those use cases.
And so how are formulas used? With formulas, we as builders know that they can be used in many different facets of an application. They can be used in a field to just calculate dynamic values based on other inputs from that same record. They can be used in custom data rules to specify, hey, when should a user be prevented from saving a record? And they can also be used in permissions. Oftentimes it is still in the form of, hey, we're going to set up this formula field and use that field as permissions. But again, there's a lot of different ways that formulas are currently being used. And with formula queries, everywhere that formulas are currently used, formula queries can be inserted in there as well. So super exciting, a lot of really powerful functionality that's going to be coming here. So what are formula queries? Well, formula queries are, like I just said, they're inline formula functions where anywhere that formulas are currently being used, and they allow us to query records within an app. So rather than just having access to data within the specific record that you're looking at, like is currently possible with the formula field, it now opens up the range of access to any data point within an application, within any field. That is like truly astounding when you really think about it. So this allows us to act on data across any table without the need for relationships. So in turn, that really helps simplify the process of displaying the data that we truly need when we're viewing or editing a record. So here's just a quick snapshot of kind of what we're looking at. Currently, on the left here, we have before. So this is in terms of a single record. Any fields on here could be, or if we had a formula field, it could reference any data point within that single record. Over here on the left, this is kind of indicating, hey, all of these data points across any of these fields are now accessible with a formula function. And so what are some of the features that are going to be available with the formula queries? Well, first and foremost, like I mentioned already, we will be able to access any records and any data within those records from anywhere across the application. So we can get a specific list of records. with a simple query string, and then we can pull values from those records. We can count the number of records that are returned within that query. And then we can also summarize values. So if we're pulling a numeric field, we can summarize across however many records are returned within that query, and we can get that summarization of all of the values that were returned there. So here are just a few of the formula query functions that we currently have. Now, just a quick reminder, this is still in development. So some of the syntax may change a little bit, but this is what we're going to be seeing as we walk through the demos today. So we've got get records as a function. With that get records, we pass in a query string and a table ID. We only need to pass in that table ID if we are actually trying to access a different table. If we're just trying to access data within the same table, we don't need to pass in that table ID. Next, we've got get cell values, which allows us to, okay, based on the records that were returned with that get records function, we can now pull specific fields from those records and work with those values specifically. Then we've got get count, which allows us to, again, count the number of records that were returned from that get records function. And then transform. And so transform is going to allow us to kind of do that summary, and we can pass in the addition, minus sign, multiplication, division, and we can operate on those records in bulk in that way. And so some of you, especially some of you beginners, may not really be familiar with the Quickbase query language. So just real quickly, I'm going to touch on that here. When we're creating a query string, we need to pass in the field ID of the field that we want to basically test against. We need to pass in an operator of how we want to test against it. And then whatever that value is that we're testing against truly. So the example here, we've got 7 equals new. So in this case, status field is field 7 equals new, and the date created is today. So we can kind of see right there above what the query syntax language would be, or the query language syntax would be, and then right below what that actually equates to in normal English. And if this isn't something that you're familiar with, we do have documentation on this within the API guide. So there's a link here. Obviously, you guys can't click that. Hopefully, we can get that dropped in the chat, though, for quick and easy reference. So now, a big question. Formula queries or relationships? As already mentioned, we don't need relationships to work with formula queries, because formula queries can work across the board without relationships. So when should I use a relationship versus when should I use a formula query? Very good question. And honestly, this is totally new. So there's, I'm sure, things that we haven't thought of yet in terms of why we would want to choose one or the other. But showing here some of the things that we have thought of so far is, well, is there an existing relationship? If there is, can you pull the data with a summary field or a lookup field? If so, great. Probably makes sense to just use that relationship that already exists. If a relationship doesn't exist and you're only looking to pull one piece of data, maybe you go for formula queries. What about if you're trying to do some sort of complex relationship? You want to kind of do like a loop relationship where relating the table back to itself. In that case, it gets into a little more hairy territory, but you probably want to use a formula query. Your standard many-to-many tables, parent-child tables, those types of relationships, probably you're still going to have and maintain for certain instances.
Mhm. And just to add to that, so it's like if you've ever had to, change the structure of your app just to get data in a certain place, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense in terms of the relationships, but you've done it just so you can have data visible in this place over here where it wouldn't necessarily be, that's probably a good fit for something like a formula query. So definitely they're different, but there may be some things that overlap for sure. So we're still learning. It's a work in progress.
Yep, absolutely. And so really, one of the things that we're going to get to in the later half of this session is the breakouts. We want to get your feedback because, like we said, we're just scratching the surface with this and what is possible and what it can be used for. So we are looking to get your feedback on what you think may be ways to use formula queries and what type of problems it may solve, or what type of challenges,
Awesome. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the first use case. So duplicate finding. So honestly, for me, this is one of the things that I've been, I've worked with customers a lot in the past to come up with some, creative solutions in order to solve, but formula queries make this so much easier. So I'm really, really excited to be presenting this today. So a couple of the things that you'll want to think about when you're trying to find duplicates, in terms of there's just, how do you want to be notified of those duplicates? Is it just a visibility thing? Is it a report? Is it something else? Who should be notified? Is it an individual or a team? And lastly, should duplicates ever exist? Do you want to put in some rules where the system actually prevents them from even occurring?
Absolutely. And typically, prior to formula queries, it required some extensive, problem solving to get to a point where you could actually identify some of those duplicates. And in doing so, you had to have some additional relationships, some lookups, some summaries, that type of thing. And again, that kind of goes into the realm of complex relationship setup just to find some duplicates. So what Ashley is going to walk us through here is how, with formula queries, we're able to very quickly surface any of those duplicate records that exist within the system, and also how to prevent those going forward.
Absolutely. So what we'll show you today is basically a quick and easy way to identify potential duplicate records. You'll be able to click into what's displaying so you can actually go and look at what that duplicate is. And then also we'll even talk a little bit about how you can prevent duplicates using the data validation rules. So that's the first use case that we'll go over. And just for sake of transition, I'll go ahead and talk about the second use case, and then I'll demo both of them together. So the second use case that I'm super excited about is managing resources. So a lot of the time in the past when a customer said, hey, how resource allocation, how can you help me? It was a lot of report building. So looking at a report and then going in and assigning an individual to a project or something like that. So what we're hoping, this can accomplish is you'll be able to see your workload, as or before you're assigning it. You may even have the ability to choose a date range and then show who's available, during those times, who has nothing overlapping during those dates. So just as you're assigning it, instead of having to first look at something and then go and assign it, you can actually, as you're assigning it, select the person that's appropriate for it, just based on their availability.
Yep. And as Ashley had mentioned, previously, one of the things that was fairly common with a lot of the customers that I'd worked with was, hey, we're going to set up a few different reports that we can then look at and kind of reference that are on a dashboard as we're filling out this form to assign people, and knowing really who has that bandwidth to take on these additional hours, projects, tasks, whatever it is.
Absolutely. So I'll go ahead and jump into demo mode now. We'll go ahead and take a look at those two use cases that we talked about. So the duplicate tracking and the managing resources. So let me go ahead and share this here with you. Okay. And Ryan, can you see the screen here? Just want to
I
make sure.
sure can.
Fantastic. Thanks, Adam. All right. So right here, you're looking at, a table of contacts. Right off the bat, you may notice that these two records look identical, right? Now, in some cases, it's not so simple, right? Sometimes you have 100 records or 200 records or thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of records. And so it's not so obvious when there might be duplicates right here. So what we've done is a couple of things. If I come in and click into this individual record, I should be able to see not only, the record information, but we have a couple of additional fields here as well. So one is this duplicate finder field, which displays, any duplicates of this record. So if you notice, this one is record number 1. So it is showing record number 1 as being a duplicate, which is, it's just showing it has the same information. But it's also showing this additional field or additional record that we're not expecting, number 33, which has the same last name and email. The nice thing is that you can control, what you expect should come back as a duplicate. So in my case, I just said if it was the last name was the same and the email address was the same, then display it here. But you can say, if, the first name and last name are the same, or just the email, or whatever that combination of things is that indicates as a duplicate to you. And the other thing I want you to notice here is this formula query text field, which basically just gives me the format of what I'm looking for. So the record ID, the last name, and the email. So that's essentially what this field will reference to pull in and display. So let's go take a look at the inside of this, kind of take a peek under the hood. So I am going to go kind of inside out. But before we do that, basically this is like an HTML table, which displays, record ID, last name, and email. And then let's go kind of inside out from the functions. So right here we have a get record, just like we talked a little bit about in the beginning of our session. And essentially what we're doing is, field ID, number 9 is the last name. So we are just comparing the last name of this particular record with the field of all the other records that it's looking at. So is the last name the same, and is the email the same? So it's an exact match in this particular case. So it's basically, get any record that has the same last name and same email. From here, we're taking those records that were returned, and we're saying get the cell values of those particular records that matched. And so getting the cell values of field ID number 11, that was that query text field that kind of displayed that format, the one, the banning, the email. And so that's essentially what that's doing. It's just grabbing, hey, if there's a match, grab that particular field. And then we're changing it into text. And then we're getting rid of any additional characters, like any semicolons and that sort of thing. So that's basically what this duplicate finder is doing, is basically saying, hey, if the last name and the email is the same, display it right here on the page for me so I know that there's a potential duplicate. And you can also even click straight into it. So, we can just click on 33 and then it will look the same, but now you'll notice we're on contact number 33, which also displays the same information to indicate that one is a duplicate of this one as well. So really, really cool stuff. I think it's awesome to be able to search it, or to be able to know that you have a duplicate. And that's kind of the first layer of this. The second layer of this is really to see, or prevent duplicates. So let's just go ahead and use this little function here, copy this contact. Okay, so I just copied it for ease of use here, but it has all of the same information. And now let me try to save it. So if you notice, a contact already exists with this email and last name. The contact was not saved. So in this particular case, we actually are now preventing duplicates from even occurring based on whatever, parameters that you set in place to determine that it's a duplicate. So let's go and take a quick look at how we're doing that. So under, the context table in the advanced settings, there are these data validation rules. You can also use formula queries in these rules. Okay. So in this case, again, I'll just kind of go inside out. So we're getting records. It's a really similar thing, right? We're just looking and saying, hey, is the last name the same? Is the email the same? If it is, then count the number of records that are returned from that. So, if there's any more than 0 records, then a contact already exists with this email and last name. And so that's essentially what this does. And then by turning this on, it prevents individuals from saving that information. Okay, so 2 layers.
Yeah, that's super helpful. I don't know about anybody else, but in my experience, finding duplicates again was a pain, and then also trying to prevent them, especially with a lot of new things where you've got people coming in. Perhaps you've got an app that's open to everyone on the internet because you're trying to get submissions or requests from the public, and maybe people enter in their information twice. They submit 2 requests, 2 forms, and now they're a duplicate. Well, this gives us a way to say, hey, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't be adding this record because it already exists. Or in the back end, we can then very quickly identify those and prevent that from happening.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the last things that I helped a customer with to help at least determine duplicates was pretty complex, where they had 3 data sources coming in with data, and those sources may or may not have the same information. But if certain things were a little bit different, we set up some pipelines to like grab those and all 3 data sets and put them in a separate table, with different formula fields where they're comparing on that level. So I mean, it worked, but this is significantly more simple and easy to use and set up. So we're really, really excited about that. So second use case is all around resource allocation. So right here we have projects, and you'll notice a couple of similar fields. So projects with the same PM, and then the query text field. So what I'll go ahead and do is set the project manager, set a start date and end date. And what you'll see right here is these are all of the projects that have overlapping dates for this particular project manager. So I can see, okay, this person might be a little bit busy for the month, between May and June, for those couple of weeks. And all the way through even September. So I can get a quick peek into who's available and who's not available when. So I can look and say, okay, well, maybe they're a little bit busy. Let's call on, Daniel or Harrison. They don't have anything maybe for that time. So, maybe that would be the more obvious choice. So just something, simple that you can actually begin to see who's available. You could take this a step further and have the system query, based on this date range, return some project managers that don't have anything for that time, or have, from least to greatest, the amount of hours or whatever essentially that you're tracking, to be able to determine who can take that workload. So pretty cool stuff. It's a very similar, feel to the duplicate finder, at least like the innards of this. So let's just go take a look at it. So right here we have essentially this text field that essentially grabs all of the values of overlapping dates. So if it's, starts before and ends after, if it's during, or it's in the middle of, the current one that we're on. So it grabs essentially all of the records that have any sort of overlapping dates. We get rid of any additional, semicolons and that sort of thing. And then we turn it into an HTML table with the record ID, the start date, and the end date displaying. So pretty similar outside of, this looks a little bit more complex, but it's basically just going through and saying, hey, if it's before the set time, during the set time, during the set time or after, or overlapping in any sort of way. Yep. So yeah, so those are just a couple of really, really cool things that I think that you can begin to do with the formula queries. Two of the things that I think our customers have asked about for a long time that we can, have a really simple answer for. So really, really excited about that.
That's great, Ashley. Thanks for walking through that. So at this point, we're going to jump back to the PowerPoint. Just run through a couple more use cases. So another use case that I've become very familiar with over the years is holidays. Maybe I have a project or a task that I need to track the duration of that task in work days because, hey, so-and-so needs to get this task done. How many days do they have to do it? But to account for the number of holidays that's in that time frame was a little bit complex. So up here on the screen, we've got an example of, one way to do it is you have a separate holidays table, you've got the projects table, and then you've got a many-to-many table in between, where you've got a pipeline that's kind of feeding that table. So, hey, when a project is updated, start or end date is changed, let's go grab any holidays within that range. We're going to add them into this many-to-many table of project holidays. And then we're going to summarize that. It's doable, it works. But is it the simplest? Is it as easy as it could be? Quite frankly, probably not. But now we have a simple and easy way to handle that. And so here's a very brief example of kind of how we can do that. We've got, instead of those 3 tables with a pipeline in between and all of a couple extra relationships in summary fields, we now have 2 tables, a holidays table and a projects table. And a simple formula query, a single field within the projects table that allows us to capture that number of days. So we're gonna get to that demo, but before we do that, I want to touch very briefly on a second use case here, which is summarizing records. Maybe I want to do a rolling summary. I've got a months table that I'm pulling all of the sales into, and I want to create a rolling summary of those months year to date, or those sales year to date. So with that, let's jump into demo portion. Okay, so this case, I'm going to go ahead and start a new project. I'm gonna give this project a name, Empower Day 3. You know what? Yeah, we'll stick with it. Doesn't make sense for a title, especially given this time range, but we'll go with it. So selected start date of May 4th. We're gonna go, let's call it August 11th. Okay, so I've got a field here, number of work days. This number of work days is just a standard formula field that's taking, hey, the end date minus the start date. I think it's using weekday sub. You know what? Let's go ahead and save this. And we can jump into this field. So yep, we're using weekday sub, end date with start date. So at that point, we are not accounting for any holidays that fall within that range. But down here, we've got this holidays query. And actually number of holidays query. We've got these 2 separate fields, totally independent of each other. One of them is returning the number of holidays that is actually within that range. And the one below is actually a multi-select text field, formula multi-select text field, that's pulling in the actual values from those fields, or from those 2 records. So first, I'm going to jump into, we'll go to holidays query first. And so again, this is a formula multi-select text. And we are, first and foremost, let's add a little bit of formatting to this, make it a little bit easier to read quick. So we've got get cell values. And again, we see some errors in here. And that's because this is still a development environment, not totally ready to go at this point. But we've got get cell values. So right off the bat, I see get cell values. And down here, line 6, I'm getting the values from field 6. Okay, what records though? Up here, we're then saying, okay, we want to get the records from the holidays table. And here's the query that we're going to pass in. We're going to say field 7, which is the holiday date. If 7 is greater than or equal to the start date, and that holiday date, field 7, is less than or equal to the end date. I want to pull all of those records, and I want to return the field or the value from field 6 within that holidays table, which in this case happens to be the holiday name. Okay, so we've got that. Awesome. I'm going to go ahead and save, keep that formatting. And then up here for number of holidays queried. Let's jump into this one. So again, very similar. We're doing the exact same get records function because we want to pull those same records. So again, if that holiday date is within the start and end date of the project, pulling that from the holidays table. The only difference here is we're using this get count. So instead of pulling values from a specific field, we're saying, hey, count the number of records that were returned with that get records function. And as we can see, in this case, it is giving us the value of 2. Now hold up. What if for some reason, we get a new holiday, a new company holiday, we get the day off. And we're going to say, add new holiday, day after Empower. Okay, so the day after Empower, oh great, we get the day off. That it's been a long week. We've been doing all kinds of fun stuff. So now in the holidays table, if I can jump back out here, we now see day after Empower, holiday date of 5/28. Jumping back into the project, what we're going to see is we should see this number jump to 3, and we should see that day after Empower show up as a holiday name. And look at that. So we've now accounted for a new holiday simply by adding a record into this holidays table. Now, one last step we need to account for is this number of workdays isn't yet considering this number of holidays. So what I can do is I'm going to go ahead and copy this. So copy that function exactly as it was. Jump into this number of workdays. Now, before we go too far, I want everybody to see number of workdays is 71. So we should see this then drop to, what's that, 68? So if we do minus, and we're going to paste that function. So I want to make sure we get it across that those two fields that we just saw, number of holidays queried and holidays queried, those aren't necessary to accomplish what we're doing here. I just have those as a display to show off and really show what is possible. Now, in this case, for the number of workdays in a single field, we are calculating, okay, here's the total duration of this project. And I'm going to subtract from that the number of holidays that fall within that range. Once I save this, number of workdays, 68.
Oh, you need technology.
And just like that, we have accounted for the holidays within here. Again, super powerful stuff that we get to see here. Okay, so that was the first use case. Now let's jump into that second use case that I touched on as far as rolling summaries. So we've got this table over here in months. We've got a month for every, or record for every month of the year. We've got this first day of month all the way down. Awesome. Super easy. We've got this sales field. This sales is a formula field, which is actually looking at the projects table. And you know what? Let me go ahead and reformat this field just a tad. Again, make it a little bit easier to read. So in here, we'll start right in the middle. We're getting the records where the first day of the month of those projects is greater than or equal to, or sorry, got that backwards. We're field 7 in the project, which is that project start date. So if the project start date is greater than the first day of the month and is less than the last day of the month, then I want to pull it in. So we've queried those records from the projects table. Then we're going to get the cell values from field 16. In this case, field 16 in the projects table is going to be a field project value. Now, again, this is all, I just have this knowledge because I built these tables, I built the functions, the formulas, or not the functions, but the formulas. So I just kind of know that field 16 in this case is that project value. When you're creating these, oftentimes you'll want to reference that field list from the table settings. So we're saying, awesome, I want to grab all of the project values from the fields, or all of the project values from the projects that exist within the month of the record we're currently viewing. And then I want to transform it. And I want to transform it with the plus operator, the addition. And so that is going to summarize, take all of those records, all of those values, and summarize them into this field of sales. And so we see, January, 4 million, some numbers. February going all the way down. We've got a few months in here that don't have any sales yet. Okay, makes sense. Kind of interesting that we've got sales going out towards the end of the year. But again, this is all fake data here. But now what we're really looking at, sales year to date. As we can see, okay, as we go down, sales for January matches. Sales year to date makes sense. Going down to February, it gets a little bigger and bigger and bigger. And we see that all of these numbers are being rolled up as we go down through the year. So I'm going to jump into the field properties here. What we've got. So within here, I set it up with 2 different variables so we can kind of see side by side what the different options are. So the first option is we're actually referencing the months table, and we're querying the other months that are within the same table. And so we see that down here, we're not calling out any other table that we want to query, because we're querying just the same table. And we're saying, okay, great, I want to find all the months where the first day of the month is less than or equal to the month that I'm looking at right now, but it needs to be within the current year. So on or after the first of the year. We're going to pull field 13, which in this case in the months table is the sales field that we just looked at, which is also a formula query. And then we're going to transform it. We're going to perform a sum operation to get those values. So that's variable 1. Down here, we've got variable 2, doing the exact same thing, but instead of looking at the other months within the same table, we're looking at the projects within the projects table. So in this case, this formula is more or less exactly the same as what we just saw in the sales, but we're saying, hey, we want to go all the way out to the beginning of the year. And I just realized that I did not actually change that query, so we'll get rid of that. More or less, concept exists or is the same, whereas we can query that data from, we get the same data whether we're querying the projects or whether we're querying the other months, as long as all of that data is the same. And then we're displaying that query months. Awesome. So we've now seen how we can, utilize formula queries for finding duplicates, for resource allocation, for holidays, accounting for holidays, doing summaries and rolling summaries. Now, I've seen a lot of questions in the chat around performance. What is the performance like? Is it better to use a relationship or use formula queries? And quite frankly, if, again, kind of going back to what we discussed at the beginning, if you are using an existing relationship, it probably makes sense to stick with that, especially if you're just pulling, a single lookup or a single summary, because there's already a connection there. But when we're starting to look at really high volume records that we want to operate on, that's where we truly start to see these formula queries perform. So I'm going to jump into this table. As we can see, over 850,000 records. This table has 857,177 records. That's a lot of records. Now, I'm going to jump, you know what? First things first, I'm going to turn on the analyze performance. So performance analyzer, if you're not familiar with it, it really helps kind of assist in seeing why a page may be loading a little slower than you would expect, or kind of how the system is processing things differently. So I just turned that on. And we're going to select one of these records. We'll go with this one. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get performance details. So we see that it took roughly 2 seconds to load. Now, you may be thinking 2 seconds to load, that's kind of a long time. Well, it is until you start to think about what really is happening within that 2 seconds. So within a half second, we've got this number of records queried. Look at that, 857,177 records were touched as soon as we tried to navigate to this record. And then not only were all of those touched to get this summary or this count of records, but we're also doing all of these different operations. So these are just a few different sample style fields of what is possible with formula queries. So we've got formula text, formula multi-select text, and then a couple of HTML style tables that we're pulling in. So again, when we're talking about performance, and this isn't even ready for rolling out GA. This is still in development. So there is still room that, hey, we may see some improvements yet in terms of speed and all that. But what we have here is truly astounding. I'm just personally, I'm so excited because I have had so many different use cases, especially over the last year when I knew that this was coming and knew what was possible with formula queries, that it literally could have saved me probably a couple hundred hours over the last year in creating different applications and solving for different use cases. So again, getting a little excited here, just because, again, I know what is possible and how much value these truly will bring to builders like yourselves. So some additional use cases that we've thought of, referencing sibling records. So records that, if you've got two child tables to a parent table, maybe you want to reference something from that other child table. Could certainly do that with formula queries. Get a running total. We actually kind of covered that with the rolling summary, but simplifying hierarchical relationships. So kind of some of those, going back to some of that looped relationship where you're relating a table back to itself, or global settings. I know I've run into a lot of use cases where, hey, I need to reference a set of data that's specific to the current year, and that can change year over year. Different things like that, where formula queries will come in and be super beneficial. So real quick, we are going to be jumping into the breakout, but before we do, have a couple more mentees. So of those 4 demos that you saw, finding duplicates, summarizing across the table. So basically that rolling summary, the holidays and the resource management or resource allocation. Which of those do you think would be the most beneficial or most helpful for you as it stands like today? Okay, and summarizing across tables in the lead. Okay, yeah, I think this pretty much kind of where we thought this would go. Just having that ability to summarize across tables, kind of being out front with some of these fairly close behind. Excellent. Awesome. Well, at this point, we are going to go ahead and jump into some of the breakout rooms. Within the breakout rooms, we really want you guys to be active and start discussing what use cases you may have that we didn't touch on that would be beneficial, or hang on, let me rephrase that. Some of the use cases that you currently have where formula queries could solve your challenges better, and help you overcome maybe some other challenges that you've run into and maybe haven't been able to come up with a solution for. We want to hear it all. We want your feedback in terms of, hey, what can you do, or what do you think you will be able to do with these formula queries?
And definitely feel free to be super creative, come up with ideas that, hey, I think this might work, or maybe not, but definitely feel free to discuss all of those things. You'll have about 10 minutes or so with your breakout group. You should be in, smaller groups. So definitely feel free to speak out. And yeah, just definitely feel free to be creative and come up with all the ideas that you can.
Absolutely. And then when we come back, actually, as you're in the breakouts, we do have another Menti here. We want you to go ahead and put your feedback in there. So what challenges do you think formula queries will solve? You will be able to add as many as you want. Keep them coming. We're going to take all this feedback and start combing through it. And we really want to kind of get a better understanding of what is possible. What are we capable of doing with formula queries? And then when we come back, we'll kind of talk through some of these different challenges that you guys provide here, and then we will get into Q&A. Okay, and we are back. Hopefully everybody had some good discussions within the breakout rooms. Obviously, I see that we've had a lot of really good feedback coming in through the Menti. So why don't we just scroll through here quick? And Ashley, I don't know if you're on mute or not, but as we come back here, okay. I think, oh, there you go. You just were hiding like way down in the videos. So really, like I said, we'll just scroll through here, maybe make some comments on some of these, and then we will jump into the general Q&A, I should say.
Yeah, unnecessary relationships, that is definitely something, I had one gentleman in my group talk about, basically having to, instead of having lookup fields like 4 levels down, basically be able to just query, like the 4th child record and look back up to the original parent, instead of having to like pull a bunch of lookup information all the way down. So I thought that was a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other ones, like KPI dashboards, super helpful if you've got, hey, here's our goals, company goals, team goals, whatever, and here's the values of those goals. Now you can put a field there that actually queries one or all of the necessary tables to actually indicate, hey, is that goal hit, or how far are we from hitting that goal? So that's awesome.
100%.
So actually, this one, simplify cascading permissions. I think there's definitely potential there for formula queries to do so. One of the other things with that I do just want to call out quick, within, I believe it was the latest release here this month, there is a new type of summary field that is just a checkbox that it will indicate that, hey, a record exists. It doesn't matter how many records exist that match the criteria in that summary field. It's just, hey, at least one record exists. So that would be super beneficial to use in cascading permissions. And we can say for certain that you will see better performance using that summary checkbox that, hey, record exists, versus doing a full summary of, hey, number of records, and then having to do some calculations after you bring that summary up. So kind of off topic, but wanted to call that out quick.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point too. You know, one of the ladies in my group has 3,000 summary fields, and you know, so and so that, I think that potentially, I'm not sure exactly what the situation is, but maybe that can help simplify some of that as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's crazy when you start to hear about and see some of the complexity in some of these different applications. And really, I think one of the questions that I've thought of, I don't know about anybody else, but great, formula queries are here. How do I then start kind of processing that and moving some of these things that already exist over to a more simple version with formula queries? I don't necessarily have an answer for that. Just one of the things that kind of came to my mind.
Absolutely. So yeah, love it. I see a lot of like year-over-year comparisons and financial summaries and things along those lines. I think that's big. And
one of the other ones.
Yeah,
go ahead. I was just going to say, one of the other ones that was mentioned within the breakout I was in is, hey, you know, we've got a list of tables that are all interconnected, and we've got a great grandparent up here and a great grandchild down here, where maybe I need to pull data from this this great grandparent, but that data doesn't need to exist within all of the other tables in between. So maybe a formula query would make sense to just pull that as a single field instead of pulling down lookups all the way down through that string of relationships.
exactly. Yep, and there's another cascading permission. So, yeah. No more max record ID relationships.
Yep. That's a fun one. Eliminating a third-party app. Awesome. That's what we love to do. You know, help you streamline and simplify your processes to only needing to go to one place to do everything you need to. That's great.
Awesome.
Yep. Virtual table joins using multiple keys like in SQL. Totally. Awesome. So really good feedback in here. Certainly appreciate everybody's input. Now, why don't we go ahead and just jump into, before we get to questions, Ashley?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of you have been asking this question, you know, I've seen it a bunch of times already, but we are hoping to have a potential for beta in June. So it will probably be something you'll have to reach out about and just, you know, try to get access to. But if you've never been to that early access application, this is where you can put in, you know, a request to have access. So if you go to quickbase.com/early access, you'll be routed to the application, and then you can request access for it. So super excited to be able to, you know, let you guys begin to play with this.
Awesome.
And lastly, just to kind of summarize all the things that we talked about today. So we talked a little bit about what are formula queries. So how are they different from traditional formulas? When should you use a relationship versus a formula query, and a little bit about the syntax. We talked through some examples and demonstrations. So we went through the duplicate and resource planning, the holiday tracking, and the summarizing field. And then we did a little bit of a breakout. So we talked internally in our breakout groups about what are the ideas that we have, what can we use the formula queries for. And then we came back and just, watched all of our ideas bubble up to the screen. So this has been really, really a fun session. It's been, I think, hopefully very informative and helpful. And that, I hope that you guys are super excited like we are. And we have a little bit of time left for Q&A. So if you guys want to start popping, some questions that you want live answered in the chat, we can begin taking those questions.
One of the things I want to touch on, I've seen a lot of comments in the chat around, hey, can we use these formula queries to go across applications? And the answer to that is no. These are going to be specific to a single application. So within a single application, you can hit any table, but it is in regards to a single application.
That's great.
Okay, question from Breakout. Would this feature sidestep the issue when trying to create a summary field if there is a formula as a reference field? So, yep, totally. I've experienced that one before, where maybe because you've got some of these complex relationships set up, you need to have a formula summary field, or not a formula summary, but a formula reference field. And if there's a formula reference field and it has certain attributes, you can't do a summary field in that relationship. So yes, formula queries would absolutely solve for that. And I think would even solve for it potentially in a way that you wouldn't even need to have, that formula reference field to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the next question from Cameron is, how performant are these? Are you noticing slowdown? So I don't know, Cameron, if you saw when Ryan looked through a table of 850,000 records, and those simple queries were querying all of those records at once, and it was within a 2-second return time, and some of the total time for I think 4 or 5 different queries. So the answer is they're super, super fast. So.
Question from Alex. Can this feature have the option to loop through data? And the answer to that is no. At this point, it is strictly pulling all of the data back, and it's going to be returned in whatever fashion it is set within that child record, or the records that are being queried, rather. Okay, and Harrison did say that the dev environment that we demoed in today is actually much slower than production. So there we go. That 2-second formed record load that was querying 850,000 plus records. Sounds like we'll see even better performance there once this goes GA.
Yeah. Okay, any additional questions or anything? Feel free to pop them into the chat. So can we do nested queries?
So,
so
I think with nested queries, what exactly are you thinking of in terms of nested queries, Philip? And you can feel free to go ahead and take yourself off mute, and we can kind of talk through it if you'd like. Could a pipeline be used to trigger the formula query to update? So Adam, when you say, hey, can we update the formula or trigger the formula query, what exactly do you mean? Because
So the formula query, it performs a function when you open the record, right?
Yep.
So if I were to trigger a notification off of that, there would be no way to trigger that notification without actually opening the record.
So
my thought would be to have, if I wanted it to fire at a certain time, have a pipeline on a schedule that could cause a refresh. And so if anything changed in that query, the trigger was set to notify, then it could happen on a schedule essentially.
Gotcha. So the formula queries, just like any other formula, is going to refresh and have the most up-to-date data anytime it is being referenced. So if you have a notification that's being fired off that has, references a formula query field, that will have the accurate data at that point in time that the notification is sent.
Awesome. Good to know.
Yep.
Oh, so you weren't talking about using the formula query field as a trigger, right? Just as a reference in the notification.
Right. So if we're talking about using it as a trigger, all formula fields, along with lookups and summaries, are what's called a derived field. And so any derived field can't truly be used as a trigger because there isn't like a triggering event because you aren't manually going in and making a change to that field. So when we're speaking in terms of triggers or triggerable fields, that's going to be what's referred to as a scalar field. And that's something that you can actually change manually. And so when we think about, hey, I want to trigger an event, that needs to happen with a non-formula field or non-lookup, non-summary. Does that make sense? I will take that as a yes. Could this potentially help rank entries to then create a graph report of top 10 statuses, for example? Potentially. I can't say for certain, but it definitely sounds like there is potential for that.
Mm-hmm. Can you look up a query field? So in terms of like a parent-child relationship and then having it pull down to the child, is that right, Ryan?
It sounds like it. And the answer to that would be yes. So when you think in terms of, hey, these formula queries, it's not a new type of field, it's a new type of function within formulas. So anywhere that you can use a formula field, you can use one of these fields that has one of these functions. So be it a summary, a lookup, permissions, custom data rules, anywhere along those lines.
And Philip came back on, looks like he lost connection, but can one query producing a table result be used as a source for another query? Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I think that's what he meant by the nested queries.
Yep, totally. And I think with that, depending on how many records are returned within that first query, you'll have to do, if it's just one, awesome, super easy. If there's more than one, you're going to have to account for, okay, how are we kind of building all of these responses into the next query?
How do you parse through that information and get rid of the additional pieces of it that you don't need?
Much better way to put it than I did.
No, I basically said exactly the same thing. So let's see.
Would it update if we're reviewing a report? So again, yes, anywhere that you currently use formula fields, these are going to apply. So just like any time that a record is being loaded, and we're seeing data for a particular record, be it in a report, a form, a notification, an event, like automation, a pipeline, or webhook, anything like that, it will be up-to-date data at that point in time.
So Chelsea asks, can we snapshot formula query results? Yes, if you make it essentially a lookup field and then take a snapshot of that lookup field, then absolutely.
Man, so many questions. I was like way high up in that list.
Oh, I might have missed some. So if I did, please let me know.
Let's see. So we've got about 10 minutes left. Any other good questions? Well, any questions at all? All the questions are good questions. Do query fields respect the permissions of the individual looking at the record? Yes. Yep. So when you are using that formula query, it will not only apply the filter or the query that is being passed within that formula, but it will also take into consideration permissions of the user that is currently viewing. A lot of really good questions. Anything else? No, no questions. Come on, and I know people's brains are just running 100 miles an hour. Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, we can probably go ahead and end it here. So we'll give you about 1 more minute. If you guys want to jump in with any questions, we can answer those quick. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and drop. Let everybody get to some of the other Empower sessions that you guys are heading to today. Last day of Empower. Hope everybody has had a wonderful time. A lot of good stuff this year.
Yeah, we're so excited that you guys came, and really excited for you all to get your hands on this as well. So definitely feel free to put yourself in that app and be able to start playing with them.
Awesome. Thank you everybody for joining. And again, enjoy the rest of Empower today.